Hopefully if you're watching this video, then you've either already received an interview for UCL or you're currently waiting for an interview. Regardless, you're probably trying to find ways to prepare and you just stumbled across this video which hopefully will help you out. Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. If you're new here, my name is Jacker and I'm a first year medical student studying at UCL. And in this video, I'm going to talk about my experience with the UCL interview, how I found it, what are some type of questions that came up, and overall just how I felt about it. Hopefully this video will give you a good insight into what the whole process is like coming from someone who's gone through it. Now if you check out my channel, you'll see a video where I kind of vlog the entire process. In that video I don't talk too much about more so the type of questions, it's largely around the preparation and whatnot. But I feel like now that my interview period is over, obviously because I was part of the 2020 to 2021 cohort, I feel like now I have a bit more freedom to actually talk about it without, risking getting in trouble. Now I'm not sure how this video will be split up, but hopefully there will be timestamps below so you can jump around and find exactly what you're looking for without wasting any time. And obviously like, comment, subscribe. I'm hoping to do a lot more videos around interviews and preparing for medical school. So if you think that will help you and you kind of fall into the demographic of a medical applicant, then definitely drop a subscribe. Now, in terms of preparation, I did a lot of mock interview practice, a lot with some of my friends, some interview prep with mentors or teachers, and I felt like doing a wide range of interview prep really prepared me for the unfamiliar nature of what an interview is like. I feel like if you practice with the same person over and over again, and what I found was that you eventually become more and more comfortable, and what you'll notice is the person you're practicing with will compare how you were at the start versus how you are now. And even if you might not be amazing at interviews, if you're better than how you started, then to them you'll seem like you've made a great amount of progress. But to someone who's seeing you completely fresh, they might not see it that way. They might think, okay, there's a lot this guy has to do to improve. And that's why I felt like doing a good variety of interview prep was really useful and just kind of put me in that constant state of being on edge. A lot of the people I was prepping with were people I was comfortable with, but even then, just kind of having that blank slate and knowing that they were kind of getting a first impression of what I was like in interviews definitely kind of made me a bit more on edge and kind of a bit more serious about it. Now, in terms of what the actual interview was like, I feel like it was a lot less stressful than I thought. Now, going into the interview, this was not how I felt. I was quite stressed. If you watch my video on kind of the whole process, I talk about how before my actual interview, there was like this quick session that some of the interviewers held for every applicant during that morning period. And I feel like that definitely helped quite a lot. I'm not sure if every medical school does it. I assume they don't. UCL kind of did this really cool thing where they gave us all a pep talk. They told us, this is what we're looking for. We want you to be genuine. We want you to be yourself. And I feel like whether I consciously realized at the moment or I didn't, it definitely put me at ease a bit. One, it made me feel more prepared, not necessarily because they were giving any amazing bits of advice or whatever. It was more so kind of a talk to calm us down and let us know that there's nothing to really stress about. But it was more so that by waking up and being present during that kind of pre-interview session, by the time my interview time came by, which wasn't much later than that initial session, I was already awake, I was ready, I was in the zone of my interview, which I think is really easy to overlook, but not being in the right mindset can be a huge difference between how well you do. Now, in terms of the actual interview panel, I had two people. They were really lovely. I really wish I remembered their names because now that I'm studying in UCL, I'd love to, have a talk with them, ask them a few questions and whatnot. I feel like it would be really cool to talk to my interviewers, but I just can't remember their names. But I'll be honest, the interview questions were not as hard as I thought. Now, in terms of interviews, I only really had two. I had one for St. George's and one for UCL, and they are quite different universities. Whether you look at their teaching style, their course structure, or even their ranking, they're quite different. And I'll be honest, going into kind of the application, I'd assume if you asked me before I even submitted my application, I would 100% say that I'd expect the UCL interview to be much harder than the St. George's one. But I was pleasantly surprised. I'd say my St. George's one was probably like twice as hard as my UCL one. Now they asked me in no particular order, I can't remember the order, but obviously they asked me the generic questions like why I want to study at UCL, why I want to do medicine, and I feel like these questions were quite straightforward because they're the ones you always prepare for. However, I do think it's careful that you don't over prepare for these questions. I feel like the strength in my answers came from the fact that even though I had prepared for them, I still feel like I came across quite genuine in the interview, and it sounded like I was thinking on the spot, which might sound like a bad thing, but it just makes you sound a lot better. Trust me when I say it's quite obvious when they can tell you've thought about a question quite a lot. It's something you slowly get better at, and I feel like because you're in the interview and you are still stressed out, you naturally forget some of the things you scripted, and sometimes that can actually work in your advantage, making you sound a lot more genuine because you are genuinely like just trying to remember the things. In terms of the why UCL, one thing I mentioned was the fact that it was in London, which I really liked, and they did ask me a few extra questions on that. So I think they asked me something along the lines of, you know, what are 3 things that you think you might see in a hospital in London that is unique to other cities? And I think I just talked about because at the time and even now I'm quite invested in the whole idea of epidemiology and the distribution of different diseases and kind of how it all links to, you know, these social determinants, you know, the things that we don't have control over. You know, this whole idea of, you know, why is this certain group affected by an illness more than another? And I think COVID really highlighted that, you know, the whole thing with the BAME community being more heavily affected, because I did a lot of research on that. So I talked about how there are certain diseases, for example diabetes, which are more common in South Asian communities, and because London has a relatively high South Asian population, I talked about how I might come across more cases of diabetes or more severe cases, and this is something that I felt was unique. I also talked about knife crime, which is quite a severe problem in the UK and in London especially, and it was just kind of, I feel like the uniqueness of my answer, which I felt like came about because I was personal, because I was myself, and I talked about something that I was genuinely passionate about. I feel like I could have given quite a generic answer, but I feel like those answers, although might not be, you know, the most amazing, I feel like at the very least they were unique, which I think was really important. Another question they asked me was about, you know, which is more important, leadership or teamwork? And this was a question that I loved because I feel like everyone prepares for these types of questions. You know, why is leadership important? Why is teamwork important? Why is, you know, being resilient important? All these things that, or these common questions you come across. This was basically it, just with 2 features put together. If you check out my video on, you know, my mock answers and some tips for common questions, I actually answer some of these questions in that video. Obviously not my exact answer, but I do think it's worth checking those out. So that was good. They also asked me about some recent reading I'd done or about something that was interesting. Now I'll be honest, that caught me off guard, and not because I hadn't done additional reading. I'd obviously done additional reading, but I feel like it was that thing of, you know, what's something you've read recently that really threw me off. And then I realized that the interview panel have literally no idea whether or not I've read something recently or, you know, a while ago. If my UCL interviewers are watching this, please click off this part of the video. But essentially I talked about a paper that I'd done my EPQ on. Now that's my extended project qualification. So essentially this was a paper that I'd written like a 5,000 word review on. So I think it was safe to say that I knew this paper inside and out. Like at the time, now probably not so well, but at the time I could probably quote all the results to the exact, you know, decimal, and that's exactly what I did, and I feel like that really made me stand out. But I think what else made me stand out was, you know, twisting it to, or not really twisting it, but, you know, making it more unique and adding a personal touch. So the whole study that I talked about, in fact, I'll link it below because I think it is quite a good study to look at if you're someone who's trying to, do some extra reading. But it was all about how Apple Watch can be used to, diagnose certain cardiac conditions. And I think I kind of introduced this paper by saying how, there's so much advancement of technology in medicine, which, by the way, is quite a cliche thing. So I thought it was the perfect way to introduce my point, and I'll explain why. And then after I said that, I talked about how, there's such great breakthroughs in modern medicine and in, for example, surgery with the implementation of technology. But this paper, or my interest, was more so sparked by the fact that this was technology being used on a more diagnostic level rather than, flashy surgical technology. This was more accessible to the everyday person, and I talked about that as a way to introduce why I was interested in it. Now, this was definitely a part of why I was interested, but I feel like by making it the highlight, it made me sound a lot more proactive than I was. It made me sound like I'd really thought about it, and then I just proceeded to talk about the paper. One thing they asked me as well is, what is one challenge faced by doctors? Now, after answering this question, I was happy with my answer, but I think really looking back on it now, I think, and this is something that, not in like a boastful way, but I feel like something that made my answer stand out, or at least I hope they did, was the fact that they were quite unique in quite small ways. So it wasn't like they were unique in the sense that, there was a breakthrough answer, like, you wouldn't expect a sixth form or a college student to come up with this answer. They were nothing special like that, but I think they were unique in the sense that, they were quite niche. They were quite kind of out there. You had the common answer, and then I feel like my answer kind of deviated. Part of that was, because I feel like I did a lot of practice. Another part of that was because I felt like, thankfully, I had quite a lot of resources to draw upon. I didn't appreciate it at the time, but I'd done quite a lot of extra reading. Now, I did make a video on some books I recommend for medicine. Looking back at that, it might seem obvious that I've done a lot of extra reading, but I feel like I never realized how much kind of extra reading or kind of videos I've watched about medicine in my spare time until it came to this interview where I was just referencing these papers left, right and center like it was nothing. So in this one, I talked about a TED talk I'd listened to when talking about the challenge of being a doctor, and this was a TED talk by Dr. Mike. Now, anyone who's kind of into medicine has probably heard of Dr. Mike. He makes quite good videos. They're quite satirical. They're quite, not as serious. They're quite funny and entertaining to watch. But I felt like if I said Dr. Mike, it would have sounded quite unprofessional. Like, I don't know why, but I just got that vibe that it wouldn't sound as educated as, referencing a scientific paper. So I don't know what possessed me to do this, but I just used his full name. So I was like, because a TED talk is quite reliable, people who deliver TED talks are typically, quite well known in their field. So I said a TED talk delivered by Dr. Mikhail Varshovsky. Now, I don't know why, but using his full name just sounded so much more sophisticated. Don't ask me why, but don't tell me you disagree, because I'm pretty sure it does sound more sophisticated when you say it like that. But yeah, his whole TED talk was about this idea that doctors are afraid to admit they don't know something. And I kind of drew on that and talked about how the fact that doctors are afraid to kind of show their weakest side, and how they feel that they can't be vulnerable or just admit that they don't know is quite a big problem in medicine. And I talked about how, although it may seem small, it can, for obvious reasons, lead to patient safety being compromised because a doctor is kind of too arrogant to admit they don't know something. Because, doctors are kind of under this microscope of having this kind of assumption put on them that they are supposed to know everything. So I'm not going to go on to about that TED talk, but again, I will link it below because why not? I really enjoyed it, but I thought that was quite a good answer to that question. Another thing worth noting is I feel like a lot of my answers link back to racism and kind of this social divide in medicine. Now, I wouldn't label myself as like a crazy social justice warrior, but I do find that I'm naturally quite interested on this whole concept of racism in medicine. And because of that interest, I've naturally read quite a bit about it. And so what I thought was a smart thing to do, because something I was interested in, is the night before 2 nights before, I decided to just sit down. I went on the medic portal, and I just searched up a bunch of kind of stats around inequality in medicine, and there was quite a few interesting stats that came up. For example, mortality rates are so much higher in black mothers than any other ethnic group when it comes to delivering children, which I thought was really interesting. And this whole idea that people from minority ethnic groups made up a larger percentage of the total deaths of frontline workers during the peak of the COVID pandemic. Now, all these statistics, I surprisingly found ways of just putting them in all throughout the interview. Now, you don't have to kind of overload them. I feel like too many facts comes across ingenuine, but it was more so as like a side piece to my main argument. So I might say, I'm interested in the whole idea of racial inequality in medicine, and this might not seem like such a big problem, but then you see stats such as ABC, and it just kind of accompanies my answer rather than being the forefront, which I feel like would come across very ingenuine and very kind of like, oh, look at me, I've done research, and that's about it. Another interesting thing to know, and I'll probably say something at the start of this video about how my interview is a bit different because we were the first cohort to do it online, but there was no questions about the BMAT or the personal statement, which I'm 100% certain UCL are known to do. They're known to scrutinize you or ask you questions on your personal statement and your BMAT, especially your essay. But for this interview, they specifically told us beforehand, they said there won't be a single question on the BMAT or the personal statement. I would have probably, or I did start reviewing my BMAT and my personal statement quite thoroughly. Obviously, you don't have your BMAT exam in front of you, but I looked up the questions and thought back to what I wrote. But this definitely took a weight off my shoulder, and I feel like that let me focus more on my extra reading and kind of my core principles of why I wanted to do medicine. Lastly, I just want to end off with like I said earlier on, when I was preparing for this interview, even though they did things that made us feel less stressed, I was still in essence quite stressed about the interview, as you'd expect. I don't know who goes to a medical interview not stressed at all, but if there's someone like that who exists, they're probably working on the next big thing in medicine, because I can't imagine anyone not being stressed. When you care about anything like your uni degree and applying to uni, you're naturally going to be stressed. But in hindsight, I don't feel like all of that stress was justified. Hear me out. First of all, even straight after my interview, I was thinking how conversational it actually felt. Like, it felt like at one point I actually forgot it was an interview. Now, I feel like part of that is because my interviewers were really animated and nice, and they were smiling, and they were quite welcoming, and so I kind of got lost in the interview. And I think a large part of that is because I'd say I'm genuinely passionate about medicine, and I assume most people watching this are as well. And if you're genuinely passionate about the field or whatever you're talking about, you'll find that you can talk about it endlessly and not get bored of it. And you got to realize that the people you're talking to have dedicated their life to healthcare, to medicine for the most part. So they'll understand your passion. When you talk about it, they will understand and they will want to listen. And I think that's what made my interview feel a lot easier. One thing to note for UCL is, trust me, and I know it's hard to kind of accept this, but the interview is kind of like a formality. If you've received an interview from UCL, then chances are they already like you as a candidate. They've seen your personal statement, they've seen your academics, they've kind of looked at all this information, and they've concluded that you seem like the type of person that would do well in their medical school. But the interview is kind of a way for them to just confirm their hunch, just to confirm whether or not they were right. Now, if you come to that interview really robotic, really kind of in that mindset that, I have to kind of wow them, and then you take this very ingenuine approach where you're talking about things you don't care about because you feel like it's what they want to hear, then you'll be shooting yourself in the leg, because when you're not passionate about something, it really comes through. And when you're genuinely passionate about something, like for example, a certain research paper or a certain field of medicine or a certain component of medicine, then that motivation and that passion will shine through, and I can guarantee you that your interviewers will kind of enjoy the interview. Because that's one thing to know, like, if you're genuine and if you're genuinely passionate and just yourself, and your interviewers enjoy the interview, then obviously it will do you nothing but good. One thing that's also worth noting is that they told us before the interview that the panel were totally blind to our application, which I actually loved. Like, this idea of the panel having no clue what you got for your BMAT, no clue what you got for your academic, no idea about your personal statement. I loved it, because it just meant that you were going into the interview with no expectation. So they had no clue if they were kind of interviewing a top 1% student or someone who maybe just about made the cut. To them, you were just an applicant, and it didn't matter what grades or whatever, all out the window. All they cared about was whether you were a genuine person, and whether you came across as someone who, you know, seems like they're good for the medical school. Because again, if you've made it to that point, then the interviewers know that based on what the admissions team have seen, you are someone that they want. You are someone that seems like they'd be good for the medical school. They know that. That's about it. The rest is up to you to kind of show them that, yes, the admissions team was right and I deserve to be here. And that was kind of what I realized slowly going into the interview, that, you know, it was conversational, it was really nice. It was just a way for me to talk about what I was passionate about. And genuinely, I can't tell you how long the interview lasted, because it literally felt like 10-15 minutes. Maybe it did last only 10-15 minutes, but it was rapid. It was over before I knew it, and I was literally just like, what on earth? Like, I genuinely wanted to talk to these guys a lot longer. That's how much I enjoyed it. So definitely just enjoy the experience. Just be genuine. They don't care if you're the smartest person in the world. If you're a robot, if you have the personality of a brick, they do not care how smart you are. They won't give you a second look. So just be yourself, be genuine, and you should be fine. I think that's about it. I feel like I've really kind of went on a loop near the ending part. Just probably mentioned the word genuine like 50,000 times, but hopefully you found this useful. This was a bit more of a sit down ramble type video, not as structured, just talking about my experience. If you enjoyed the video, let me know what you thought. Ask me any questions below. Obviously I'm a UCL medic, and I've literally, like, I did this interview process exactly 1 year ago, which I think is worth noting. I think my interview was on around mid-February, and I got my conditional offer mid-March, which again you can watch in that video. Like, all the dates are probably there. Ask me any questions below, and if you enjoyed it, drop a like, subscribe, and yeah, that's been all from me, and goodbye. I'm sick of daydreaming, I just want the feeling of you in my bed.